I'll be honest, the worst part was not that my husband cheated. It was that she waved at me every morning like she was not helping him destroy my life. Her name was Emily, and she lived right across the street from us. Every morning when I left for work, she would be outside with her coffee, smiling from her porch like we were just two women sharing the same quiet neighborhood. Sometimes she asked about my day. Sometimes she came over for coffee. Sometimes she sat in my kitchen, laughing with me, while my husband moved around the room like nothing in our life had already started to rot. My husband's name was Ryan, and by then we had been married for 4 years. Our life was calm, which is not the same thing as happy, though I did not understand that at the time. We did not scream at each other. We did not slam doors. We had routines, shared bills, grocery lists, weekend plans, and the kind of marriage that looked stable because nobody was asking hard questions. I trusted him because he had never given me a reason not to. At least, that was what I told myself. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Tampa, in a neighborhood where people noticed everything but pretended not to. Lawns were trimmed, trash bins came in by noon, and everybody knew which couple had a new baby, which house was being renovated, and which neighbor had suddenly stopped wearing her wedding ring. Emily moved in 2 years after us. At first, she was just the friendly woman across the street with the neat little porch and the sad smile. Her partner had left a few months before everything began, and she carried that loneliness in a way that made people want to be kind to her. I understood that feeling. I knew what it was like to sit in a house that suddenly felt too quiet, even if mine was not supposed to feel that way. So I invited her in. That was how it started. A cup of coffee became an hour at my kitchen table. An hour became dinner when Ryan got home. Dinner became casual evenings where Emily stayed longer than she planned because she said going back to an empty house felt depressing. I felt sorry for her. That sympathy would later become the door she used. Ryan liked her right away, and in the beginning, that made me happy. I wanted my husband to be kind to my friends. I wanted Emily to feel welcome. I wanted our home to be the kind of place where someone hurting could sit down, breathe, and remember that not every door in life closes at once. He helped her carry groceries once. Then he fixed a loose cabinet hinge in her kitchen. Then he started mentioning little things about her house, her schedule, her broken sprinkler, her missing trash pickup, as if her life had quietly become part of his daily awareness. None of it was suspicious on its own. That is what makes betrayal so difficult to catch when it begins close to home. It does not always arrive as lipstick on a collar or a hotel receipt in a pocket. Sometimes it arrives as kindness, a repaired cabinet, a shared joke, a neighbor standing in your kitchen, thanking your husband a little too softly. The first moment I remember clearly happened on a Sunday evening. Emily had come over for dinner, and we were sitting in the living room afterward, half watching some home renovation show while rain tapped against the windows. Ryan said something about the host choosing ugly tile, and Emily laughed immediately. Not politely. Not because it was funny. Immediately, like she had been waiting for him to say it. Ryan looked at her when she laughed, and for 1 second his face changed. It was small, almost nothing, but it felt private in a way that did not belong in my living room. His eyes softened. Her smile held a little too long. Then they both looked away at the same time, like they had remembered I was sitting there. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself women who have good husbands do not start inventing problems because a neighbor laughed at a joke. So I let it go. A few days later, Emily came over while Ryan was still at work. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee, and she asked me normal questions about work, groceries, and whether I had tried the new bakery near the gas station. Then, in the middle of nothing, she looked toward the hallway and said, "You're lucky, you know." I smiled because I thought she meant the house. Lucky how? She stirred her coffee slowly, though she had not added anything to it. "Ryan is a good man," she said. The sentence should have sounded harmless. It did not. There was something in her voice that felt less like a compliment and more like possession testing the air. She said his name too carefully, like it had weight in her mouth. I remember looking at her hands around the mug and noticing that she would not meet my eyes. "Yes," I said. "I know." She nodded quickly, almost like she regretted speaking. After that, I began seeing things I had ignored before. Ryan started coming home late, but only late enough to explain. 15 minutes. 30 minutes. Sometimes an hour, always with a reason ready before I asked. Traffic was bad. Work ran long. A client called at the last second. His answers were calm, reasonable, and smooth enough that accusing him would have made me feel ridiculous. Then his phone habits changed. He used to leave it anywhere. On the counter, beside the couch, charging in the bedroom with the screen facing up. Suddenly, it stayed close to him. He carried it to the bathroom. He turned it face down during dinner. When it lit up, his hand moved toward it before his eyes did, almost like his body had learned the secret before his face could hide it. One night, he came home late again. I was already in bed, but I was not asleep. I heard the garage door open, then his careful steps through the hallway. He entered the room quietly, too quietly, like he was trying not to wake a woman who was already awake and listening. He placed his phone face down on the nightstand. Then he went into the bathroom and stayed there for almost 20 minutes. When he came back, he smelled like soap. Not our soap. Something sharper, cleaner, unfamiliar. I did not say anything, but something inside me changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was more like a small light turning on in a room I had avoided entering. I did not know the whole truth yet, but I understood one thing with terrible clarity. Patterns do not appear without reason. And the next morning, when I opened the front door to leave for work, Emily was standing across the street with her coffee in one hand and her robe tied loosely around her waist. She smiled and waved. Ryan's phone buzzed behind me on the hallway table, and before the screen went dark, I saw her name. I stood in the hallway with my purse still on my shoulder, staring at Ryan's phone until the screen went black again. Emily's name had appeared for only a second, but that second felt longer than the whole morning. It was not proof, and I knew that. A neighbor could text my husband for 100 innocent reasons. Maybe her sprinkler was broken again. Maybe she needed help moving something. Maybe she had sent a message about the neighborhood trash schedule or some package delivered to the wrong porch. But my body did not believe any of those explanations. Across the street, Emily lifted her mug and waved again, smiling like nothing in the world was strange. I waved back. That was the first time I understood how frightening normal things can look once trust begins to crack. Ryan came out of the bedroom a moment later, buttoning his shirt with one hand and reaching for his phone with the other. He picked it up quickly, too quickly, and glanced at the screen before slipping it into his pocket. "Everything okay?" I asked. He looked at me with that calm, easy face I had trusted for years. "Yeah," he said. "Just a work thing." A work thing. I almost asked why a work thing had Emily's name on it, but I stopped myself. Something in me knew that if I asked too soon, he would only become cleaner, more careful, better at hiding whatever had already begun. So I smiled, picked up my keys, and left for work. That day, I barely heard anything anyone said to me. I answered emails, attended 2 meetings, and nodded through a conversation about quarterly numbers while my mind kept returning to one simple image: Emily standing across the street in her robe while Ryan's phone lit up behind me. By the time I came home, I had made a quiet decision. I was not going to confront him. I was going to observe. Not dramatically. Not obsessively. I was not going to follow him or turn into someone I did not recognize. I was simply going to stop helping the lie by explaining everything away before it had to explain itself. That evening, Emily came over with a small container of soup. "I made too much," she said, standing at the door with that soft, neighborly smile. I looked at the container in her hands, then at her face. Her hair was damp from a shower, and she smelled faintly of the same sharp soap Ryan had carried into our bedroom the night before. For a moment, I forgot how to speak. "That's nice of you," I said finally. Ryan was in the living room, and when he heard her voice, he came to the door before I called him. That was new too. He used to let me handle neighbors, deliveries, small talk, all the little social things that made him impatient. But with Emily, he appeared almost instantly. "Hey," he said, and his voice warmed in a way I had not heard when he greeted me that afternoon. Emily smiled down at the soup. I brought dinner back up. Ryan laughed. You're saving us from my cooking. I stood there between them, holding the door open, feeling like the air itself had shifted around my body. Nothing obvious happened that night. That was the worst part. They did not touch. They did not whisper. They did not make some dramatic mistake I could point to and say, there, that is what I mean. They simply existed too comfortably in the same space. Emily knew where the bowls were. Ryan remembered that she hated cilantro. She teased him about burning toast, and he answered like the joke belonged to both of them. I watched from the kitchen counter, smiling when I needed to smile, laughing once when the silence demanded it. But inside, I was counting. I counted how often he looked at her before answering me. I counted how quickly she turned her phone over when it buzzed. I counted the pauses, the glances, the tiny moments where they seemed to know what the other was thinking before anything was said. Later, after Emily went home, Ryan washed the dishes while I dried them beside him. She's been around a lot lately, I said. I kept my voice light. He shrugged without looking at me. She's lonely. I know. She doesn't really have anyone close right now. That sentence bothered me because it sounded rehearsed, like he had already explained her presence to himself so many times that the words were smooth from use. I set a plate in the cabinet. You seem very concerned about her. He looked at me then, and there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly. More like irritation that he had to answer a question he thought I should not be asking. She's our neighbor, he said. And your friend. My friend. The words landed softly, but they stayed. Because he was right. I had made her my friend. I had invited her into our kitchen, into our routines, into the small daily spaces where marriage usually stays private. I had trusted her because she was close, and I had trusted him because he was mine. That night, I woke up just after 2. Ryan was not in bed. I did not move right away. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house, and after a few seconds, I heard the faint sound of the back door closing. Not opening. Closing. I got up carefully and walked to the window. Across the street, Emily's porch light was on. And in our driveway, Ryan's car was still there. That meant he had not gone far. He had only gone somewhere he could reach on foot. I stood by the bedroom window for longer than I should have, watching the soft glow from Emily's porch across the street. Ryan's car was still in our driveway. His shoes were not by the bed. And somewhere in the dark between our house and hers, my husband had walked out of our back door like there was a part of his life that did not need me in it. For a few seconds, I told myself to go downstairs. I told myself to open the back door, step outside, and see whatever was waiting for me to see. But something stopped me before I moved. It was not fear exactly. It was the kind of cold instinct that tells you not to reveal what you know until you know enough to survive the answer. So I stayed at the window. Across the street, Emily's porch light stayed on for almost 10 more minutes. Then it went dark. A little while later, I heard the back door open again. Ryan moved through the kitchen quietly, then up the stairs, then into our bedroom with the careful steps of a man trying not to wake his wife. I lay back down before he reached the door and kept my breathing slow, even though my whole body felt tense beneath the blanket. He slipped into bed beside me. He smelled faintly of night air. And underneath that, I caught the same sharp soap I had noticed before. Not ours. Hers. The next morning, I did not ask where he had been. That may sound strange, but by then I understood something clearly. If I asked him too soon, he would give me one answer, and that answer would become the story I was expected to accept. He would say he could not sleep. He would say he went outside for air. He would say he checked the side gate because he heard a noise. And if I pushed harder, he would turn the question back on me. Why are you acting like this? Why do you not trust me? Why are you making something out of nothing? I knew those sentences before he even had to say them. So I let the morning happen. I made coffee. He kissed my cheek. Emily waved from across the street when I left for work. And all 3 of us played our parts so well that someone watching from the sidewalk would have thought we were just a normal little neighborhood, full of normal little routines, with nothing ugly moving beneath them. But I had stopped believing in normal. Over the next few days, I watched more carefully. I noticed that Ryan no longer complained when Emily came over. He used to joke that our kitchen was turning into a coffee shop because she was always at the table. Now, when she knocked, he stood a little straighter before I opened the door. He ran his hand through his hair. His voice warmed by half a degree, not enough for anyone else to hear, but enough for a wife who had spent 4 years learning the weather of his moods. Emily changed too. She became softer around me, almost too kind. She brought muffins from the bakery, asked if I needed help with laundry, and once, while we were sitting in the kitchen, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "You look tired," she said. The concern in her voice sounded practiced. I looked at her fingers on mine and thought about Ryan walking through the dark toward her house. "I haven't been sleeping well," I said. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway. Just for a second. Then back to me. "That's awful," she said. "You should rest more." I almost asked her whether my husband was helping her sleep better than he was helping me. Instead, I smiled. Because now I was learning something painful about silence. Sometimes silence is not denial. Sometimes silence is strategy. That Friday evening, Ryan said he had to run a quick errand after work. He said it casually, while standing in the kitchen with his phone in his hand and his car keys already looped around one finger. He did not meet my eyes when he said it, and that mattered more than the errand itself. "What kind of errand?" I asked. He looked at me then, too quickly. "Just picking something up from the hardware store." "For what?" "The garage light," he said. "It's been flickering." The garage light had not been flickering. At least, not that I knew of. I nodded anyway and watched him leave through the front door. 10 minutes later, I saw Emily's car pull out of her driveway. She did not look toward our house. That was how I knew she was trying not to. I sat at the kitchen table for almost half an hour, telling myself not to become reckless. I did not follow them. I did not call him. I did not text Emily. I simply opened my laptop and checked our shared credit card account, something I had not done in weeks because Ryan usually handled the monthly review. There was a charge from a small wine bar 20 minutes away. 2 glasses of wine. A shared appetizer. Last Tuesday night. The same night Ryan told me traffic had been terrible and Emily said she had gone to bed early because she felt lonely. I stared at the charge until my vision blurred. It was not enough. Not legally. Not emotionally. Not enough to drag into a conversation and expect the truth. A person could explain a wine bar. A person could say it was business, a friend, a misunderstanding, a receipt entered wrong. People who want to lie can make even obvious things sound flexible. But the pattern was no longer living only in my gut. It was on paper now. When Ryan came home that night, he carried a small bag from the hardware store. Inside was a light bulb. I looked at it and almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because he had remembered to buy the prop. "Did you fix the garage light?" I asked. He blinked. "Not yet." Emily's porch light was on behind him through the front window. I nodded. "Of course." He looked at me for a moment, like he felt something under the words, but could not decide how much danger was there. That night, after he fell asleep, I went downstairs. His phone was on the kitchen counter. For once, it was unlocked. Maybe he had gotten careless. Maybe he trusted my trust more than he should have. Either way, Emily's name was already open on the screen. I did not have to search. I only had to read. The first visible message was from Ryan. She noticed the wine bar charge. "I think she knows something," Emily had replied. "Then stop acting scared. She trusts you." I felt the room go very still around me. Then I scrolled. The conversation went back weeks. Not days. Weeks. There were messages about seeing each other after I went to sleep, about keeping things normal, about Emily coming over for coffee because it gave them a reason to be in the same room without anyone questioning it. Then I found the message that made my hands start shaking. Emily had written, "It feels wrong sitting in her kitchen." Ryan had answered, "Just give me time. After the weekend, I'll talk to her." Time. Always time. More time to lie. More time to use my home as cover. More time for her to wave at me every morning like she was not waiting for my life to split open. I took screenshots with my own phone, one after another, forcing my hands to stay steady. Then I placed Ryan's phone back exactly where it had been. Same angle. Same position. No trace. When I looked out the front window, Emily's house was dark. But now I knew the truth was not hiding across the street anymore. It was standing in my kitchen with me. I stood in my kitchen with Ryan's phone back on the counter, and for several minutes, I did not move. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt peaceful. It felt staged. Every familiar thing around me suddenly looked like it had been used in a performance I did not know I was watching. The coffee mugs Emily had held. The kitchen chair where she always sat. The front window where I could see her porch across the street. Even the floor between our houses felt different now, like it had become a path they had been walking behind my back. I had proof. Not a feeling. Not a suspicion. Proof. And somehow, that did not make me feel stronger right away. It made me feel colder. Because before I picked up that phone, there had still been one small, desperate place inside me where innocence could hide. Maybe I had misunderstood the late nights. Maybe the wine bar had an explanation. Maybe the soap was nothing. Maybe the porch light meant nothing. But the messages had killed every maybe. Ryan came downstairs early the next morning, acting normal enough to make my stomach turn. He made coffee, kissed my shoulder, and asked if I had slept better. I looked at him for one long second, thinking about how strange it is when someone touches you with the same hand they used to lie to you. A little, I said. He believed me. That was the part one kept noticing now. He believed me because he still thought my trust belonged to him. Across the street, Emily was outside watering the plants on her porch. She wore leggings, an oversized sweatshirt, and that same gentle smile she used whenever she wanted to look harmless. When she saw me through the window, she lifted one hand and waved. I waved back. My hand felt like it belonged to someone else. Later that day, Emily texted me, "Want coffee this afternoon? I feel like I haven't seen you properly." I stared at the message for a while, wondering whether she had any idea how cruel that sounded. She saw me every day. She saw me in my kitchen, in my driveway, through the window, across the street. She had seen enough of me to know exactly what she was helping Ryan destroy. I wrote back, "Come over tonight. Ryan will be home too." Her reply took longer than usual. "Sure. Everything okay?" I almost laughed. That question was always the first little shield. Everything okay? As if people who ask that are not sometimes the reason nothing is. I answered, "We'll talk tonight." No heart. No smile. No extra words. By late afternoon, the air in the house felt heavy. Ryan came home around 6, and I could tell he knew something was different before I said anything. He looked around the kitchen, then at me, then toward the front window, as if he expected the truth to be visible in the room. "Emily coming over?" he asked. I had not told him that. That was his mistake. I turned slowly from the sink. "How did you know?" His face stayed calm, but his eyes moved too quickly. "She mentioned she might stop by." Of course she did. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, I saw him hesitate. Emily knocked 15 minutes later. She had brought a bottle of wine. That almost broke something in me. Not because of the wine itself, but because she had brought it into my house like this was another ordinary evening, another little neighborhood visit, another chance to sit near my husband while pretending I was not the woman standing between them. I opened the door and let her in. She hugged me. I let her. But I did not hug back the same way, and she felt it immediately. Her body stiffened for half a second before she pulled away and looked at my face. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I said. "Not really." Her smile faded. Ryan stepped into the living room behind me, and the second their eyes met, I saw the silent conversation pass between them. It was quick, but it was there. Fear. Question. Warning. They had been speaking without me for so long that even now, with me standing between them, they reached for each other first. I closed the front door. "Sit down," I said. Neither of them moved right away. Then Ryan sat in the armchair, and Emily lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, holding the wine bottle in both hands like she had forgotten what to do with it. I stayed standing. I needed to. If I sat, I was afraid the pain would finally catch up to me. "I saw the messages," I said. The room went completely still. Ryan's face emptied first. Emily looked down at her hands. That alone was enough. Still, I kept going because they were not going to control this moment anymore. I know about the wine bar. I know about the late nights. I know about the porch light, and I know you've been meeting after I went asleep. Ryan stood up. Listen. No, I said. My voice was not loud, but it stopped him. That surprised both of us. I looked at Emily. You came into my kitchen and asked me if I ever felt like something was off. Her eyes filled quickly. Too quickly. I felt guilty, she whispered. I nodded slowly. Not guilty enough to stop. She looked down again. Ryan tried to speak, but I turned to him before he could. When were you going to tell me? He swallowed. That was all the answer I needed, but I made him try anyway. After the weekend, he said. The same words from the messages. Even caught, he was still using the same delay. I let out a small breath that almost became a laugh. You were going to give yourself one more weekend of lying to my face? It wasn't like that, he said. It was exactly like that. Emily wiped at her cheek. I didn't mean for this to happen. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt the full strangeness of the betrayal. This woman lived across the street. I could see her porch from my window. I had shared coffee with her, accepted her loneliness, listened to her talk about being left, and all the while she had been becoming the person who helped my husband leave me. You knew me, I said. That's the part one can't get past. She started crying harder, but I did not move toward her. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. I was confused. No, I said. You were comfortable. He looked up. You were comfortable letting me trust you, I continued. You were comfortable letting her sit in my kitchen. You were comfortable walking across the street in the middle of the night because you thought I would never look out the window. No one spoke. The truth had finally entered the room with enough weight that even they could not talk around it. Then I asked the question that mattered most. What was the plan? Ryan looked at Emily. Emily looked at him. And that little exchange told me something I had not expected. They did not have one truth between them. They had two lies. Ryan finally said I was going to end it. Emily's head turned toward him. You told me you already had, she whispered. The room changed again. Because suddenly I understood this betrayal was not even built on some grand love story. It was built on cowardice, convenience, and different versions of the same lie. I looked at both of them. Then I said the only thing left that mattered. I'm done. When I said I was done, the room did not explode the way I expected it to. No one shouted. No one rushed toward me. No one made some dramatic confession that finally made everything feel honest. Ryan just stared at me from across the living room, while Emily sat on the edge of my couch with her hands folded in her lap, crying quietly in the house where she had been welcomed like a friend. That silence told me something important. They had imagined being caught, but they had not imagined me leaving without begging for an explanation. I walked past them and went into the bedroom because I needed to move before the pain found my legs. The room looked exactly the same as it had that morning, and that felt almost cruel. Ryan's watch was on the dresser. My robe was folded over the chair. The framed photo from our anniversary trip sat on the nightstand, showing two people smiling beside the ocean like the future had not already started cracking behind them. I opened the closet and pulled down a bag. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Maybe the body has a mercy of its own during betrayal. Maybe it lets you become practical for a while, because if you felt everything at once, you would never make it out of the room. Ryan appeared in the doorway a moment later. Please don't do this tonight, he said, and his voice had softened into the version he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. I kept packing. What exactly am I doing, Ryan? You're making a permanent decision while you're hurt. I placed a stack of clothes into the bag and looked at him. No. I'm making a decision because I finally stopped being stupid. His face tightened. That's not fair. I laughed once, but it came out empty. You brought fairness into this house and left it across the street. He looked away, and for 1 second, I thought maybe shame had finally reached him. Then he spoke again, and whatever small hope I had left died quietly. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I turned back to the closet. That sentence was almost insulting in how small it was. He did not say it was not supposed to happen. He only said it was not supposed to happen like this, with me knowing before he had shaped the story, before Emily had cried in the right places, before they could make me feel like my pain was inconvenient timing. Emily appeared behind him a few seconds later. She did not come fully into the room. She stood in the hallway like she did not know whether she still had permission to exist inside my house. Her face was swollen from crying, but I noticed she kept looking past me at Ryan, waiting for him to choose a version of the truth that would protect her too. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I zipped a side pocket on the bag and looked at her. "You were sorry in my kitchen too, weren't you?" She blinked. "When you sat with me and asked if something fell off," I continued. "When you brought soup. When you waved every morning. You were sorry the whole time, and you still kept doing it." Her mouth trembled, but no words came out. Ryan stepped slightly in front of her, and that tiny movement hurt more than I expected. Even now, standing in our bedroom while I packed to leave our marriage, his instinct was to protect her from my truth. That was the moment I stopped seeing him as confused. He was choosing. Maybe he had been choosing for weeks. I reached for my documents folder from the drawer, then grabbed my laptop charger and the small jewelry box my grandmother left me. I did not take everything. I could not. There are moments when you understand that a life cannot be packed in one night, and maybe it should not be. Some things can stay behind. Some things no longer belong to who you are becoming. When I walked back into the living room, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from our neighbor, Mrs. Keller, who lived 2 houses down and somehow knew every package, dog, argument, and visitor on the block before anyone else did. Her message made my stomach drop. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Emily told me weeks ago that you and Ryan were separating. I didn't want to intrude, but I saw you leaving with a bag. I read it once. Then again. Weeks ago. Emily had not only betrayed me in private. She had started preparing the neighborhood to accept her version before I even knew there was a version to fight." I looked up slowly. Ryan had gone pale. Emily covered her mouth with one hand. And in that moment, I understood that the affair was only part of what they had done. They had already started replacing me in public. I stood in the living room with my bag in one hand and Mrs. Keller's message glowing on my phone, and for a moment the betrayal changed shape again. Until then, I had thought the worst part was private. Ryan and Emily meeting after I went to sleep. Emily sitting in my kitchen with coffee in her hands. The wine bar charge. The messages. The way both of them had smiled at me while quietly planning a life that did not include me. But now I understood something colder. They had not only betrayed me inside my home, they had started preparing the outside world to accept it. Mrs. Keller said Emily had told her weeks ago that Ryan and I were separating. Weeks ago. Back when I was still making dinner for him, still waving at Emily across the street, still thinking my marriage had problems small enough to survive. I looked up from the phone. Emily's face had gone pale. Ryan took one step toward me, then stopped when he saw my expression. "What did she say?" he asked. I turned the screen toward him. He read the message quickly, and for a second, his face showed something close to panic. Not because he was sorry. Not because I had been humiliated. Because now there was another witness, another person outside the room who knew there had been a story moving ahead of me. Emily whispered, "I didn't mean it like that." That sentence almost broke the last thread of patience I had. "How did you mean it?" I asked. She looked down at the floor. I just didn't know what to say when people started noticing things. I stared at her, because that was the first honest thing she had said all night. People had noticed. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the late-night visits or the messages or the way Ryan's voice changed when her name appeared on his screen. But neighbors notice patterns. They notice cars, porch lights, doors opening late, people crossing streets when they think the whole block is asleep. And Emily had not denied it. She had explained it before anyone could ask me. Ryan rubbed his forehead and said, "It was just easier than having people talk." I let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. Easier for who? He did not answer. Because the answer was obvious. Easier for him. Easier for Emily. Easier for the woman across the street who wanted to become part of my life before I had even been told I was being removed from it. I looked at Emily again. "You told people we were separating while I was still inviting you into my kitchen." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time I could not even feel anger toward them. They looked useless to me now. Too late. Too familiar. Too convenient. I thought he was going to tell you, she said. Ryan's head turned sharply toward her. That tiny movement told me the next truth before she finished speaking. Emily had believed one version. Ryan had been living another. I shifted my bag higher on my shoulder and asked, "What exactly did he tell you?" Emily looked at him first, and for the first time, she looked afraid of the answer. "He said you both knew things were ending," she whispered. "He said you were just waiting until after the weekend because you didn't want drama in the neighborhood." I looked at Ryan. His face hardened, but he said nothing. That silence told me everything. He had lied to both of us. Different lies, shaped for different women, all designed to give him more time. With me, he acted like nothing was wrong. With her, he acted like I already knew. And with the neighbors, he let Emily quietly build a version where my marriage was already over before I had even been told. For a second, I felt dizzy. Not from sadness. From the cruelty of how organized it all was. "You made me the last person in my own life," I said. Ryan's expression shifted, but not enough. "Claire, I was trying to figure out how to handle it." I hated hearing my name in his mouth. "No," I said. "You were trying to make sure everyone else was ready before I had a chance to be." Emily covered her mouth and started crying harder. I turned toward her, and this time my voice came out quieter. "And you helped him." She shook her head. "I didn't know he hadn't told you. You knew enough to hide it." That ended her denial. She looked away, and I finally saw the truth settle over her. Maybe she had been lied to. Maybe Ryan had made her feel chosen, safe, special, and less guilty than she deserved. But she still knew she was sitting in my house as something more than a neighbor. She still knew the jokes were not innocent. She still knew the porch light meant something. Ryan stepped forward again. "Please don't leave tonight," he said. "We need to talk before this gets worse." I looked at him for a long moment. The audacity of that sentence almost impressed me. "This already got worse," I said. "You just didn't expect me to find out from someone else." Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Mrs. Keller. "I'm sorry. I thought you knew. Emily said Ryan had been staying over there because you two were trying space." My stomach turned. Staying over there. So the back door had not been one night. The porch light had not been one coincidence. And the whole street had been watching a version of my marriage I did not know existed. I picked up my keys from the table. Ryan's voice sharpened. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere I don't have to be the last person told the truth." Emily stepped toward me. "Claire, please." I stopped at the door and looked at her. She was standing in my living room, crying under the same roof where she had sat beside me and asked if I ever felt something was off. And suddenly I understood that she had not asked because she cared. She had asked because she wanted to know how close I was to seeing her. "You don't get to ask me for comfort," I said. Then I opened the door. Outside, the street was quiet, but it no longer felt innocent. Every porch light looked like an eye. Every window looked like it might know something before I did. Across the street, Emily's house sat dark and still, like it had not been part of dismantling mine. I walked to my car without turning back. As I opened the door, Ryan called my name from the porch. I looked at him one last time. He stood there barefoot, desperate, framed by the doorway of the house we had built together. And behind him, Emily stood in my living room like she had already been waiting to take my place. I stood beside my car with my hand on the door handle, looking at Ryan on the porch and Emily behind him in my living room, and for one strange second, I felt like I was watching my own life from across the street. Maybe that was what made it so unbearable. This was not some secret hotel room across town. This was not a hidden affair with a woman I would never see again. This was my neighborhood, my driveway, my front porch, the same street where I had carried groceries, waved at people, planted flowers, and believed I was living inside something ordinary. Now every house seemed to know more than I had. Mrs. Keller's message still glowed on my phone. Emily said Ryan had been staying over there because you two were trying space. Trying space. I almost laughed at the phrase because it sounded so gentle, so mature, so clean. It made my marriage sound like something we had discussed over coffee, something mutual and careful, instead of something being pulled apart while I slept in the same bed as the man doing it. Ryan stepped off the porch. "Claire, please," he said. Come back inside. I looked at him carefully. Why? He stopped. That one word seemed to catch him off guard. Not because it was complicated, but because the honest answer was too ugly. He did not want me inside because he loved me enough to tell the truth. He wanted me inside because the street was quiet, the porch lights were on, and somewhere behind curtains, people might be noticing the woman with the overnight bag leaving her own house while the neighbor stood behind her husband. Emily appeared in the doorway then. She had wrapped her arms around herself, and for a moment she looked small, almost frightened. A month earlier, that might have softened me. I might have remembered that she had been lonely, abandoned, and embarrassed after her breakup. I might have stepped toward her instead of away from her. But that version of me had not read the messages. That version of me had not seen the wine bar charge. That version of me had not learned that Emily had been telling the neighborhood my marriage was already over while still drinking coffee at my kitchen table. Claire, Emily said, I never wanted people to think badly of you. That sentence landed strangely. Not because it was comforting, because it revealed the whole shape of what she had done. You just wanted them to think I was already gone, I said. Her face crumpled. Ryan turned toward her, and the irritation in his eyes flashed before he hid it. That tiny look told me more than either of them realized. He was not angry that she hurt me. He was angry she had been careless enough to expose the story too early. I opened my car door. Ryan's voice changed then, sharper at the edges. You're making this look worse than it is. I looked back at him. There it was. The real fear. Not that I was leaving. That I was leaving visibly. You made it look like I had already agreed to this, I said. So don't complain now that people might see the truth. He did not answer. Across the street, Emily's porch light was still off, but I could see her house clearly. The small white table where she drank coffee. The flower pots by the steps. The front window where I had probably been watched more times than I wanted to imagine. I got into the car and closed the door before either of them could say anything else. For a moment, I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, breathing through a pain that had become too large to name. Ryan stood in the driveway. Emily stood behind him. And behind them both was the house I had thought was mine. Then I started the engine. I did not know where I was going at first. I only knew I was not sleeping in a house where my husband had made me the last person to know my own marriage. I drove until the neighborhood disappeared in the rearview mirror, until the streets became wider, brighter, less familiar. I checked into a small hotel near the interstate, the kind with tired carpet, vending machines, and a front desk clerk who looked at my bag and my face, but politely asked no questions. The room was quiet. Too quiet. I placed my bag on the bed, sat beside it, and finally let my hands shake. Ryan called 11 times that night. Emily called once. I answered neither. Instead, I called my sister, Megan. I had not told her anything yet because saying the words out loud would make them real, and some part of me had been trying to survive in small pieces. But when she answered, cheerful and half distracted, I broke before I could even form a proper sentence. He cheated, I said. With Emily. The silence on the other end changed instantly. Our Emily, she asked. I almost smiled at that. Our Emily. That was the problem with neighbors like her. They stop being just neighbors. They become woven into your routine, your street, your casual conversations, your little sense of safety. She had been part of the scenery of my life so completely that even my sister knew her name. Yes, I said. And she's been telling people Ryan and I were already separating. Megan did not tell me to calm down. She did not ask whether I was sure. She only said, send me everything. So I did. The screenshots. The credit card charge. Mrs. Keller's messages. Everything. And by the time I finished sending it all, I realized something important. I was no longer only hurt. I was documenting. I was protecting myself from the version of the story they had already started building without me. The next morning, I woke up after maybe 2 hours of sleep and called a lawyer. Her name was Denise, and she listened without interrupting while I explained the messages, the neighbor, the hotel, and the fact that people on my street had been told I was already separated before I knew my marriage was ending. When I finished, she said something simple. Do not meet him alone. Those 5 words made the room feel colder, but also clearer. Because someone outside the marriage had just confirmed what my body already knew. This was not only heartbreak anymore. This was control. Ryan was not trying to protect me from pain. Emily was not trying to avoid gossip. They had both been managing the environment around me so that, when the truth finally came out, it would look less like betrayal and more like a transition I had somehow approved. That afternoon, I went back to the house with Megan. Ryan was there. Emily was not. Or at least, she was not inside. Her curtains moved across the street when we pulled into the driveway, and I felt a cold little certainty that she was watching. Maybe she wanted to see whether I would cry. Maybe she wanted to see whether Ryan would stop me. Maybe she wanted confirmation that the place she had been waiting to enter was finally emptying. I did not give her a scene. I packed what mattered. Documents. Clothes. My laptop. The jewelry box from my grandmother. A folder of financial papers. Megan stayed in the doorway the whole time, arms crossed, saying nothing unless Ryan moved too close. He tried to speak anyway. "I didn't mean for it to get this out of control," he said. I looked at him then, with a folded sweater in my hands, and felt something settle inside me. "You keep talking like the problem is that I found out wrong," I said. "The problem is that you did it." He looked down. No answer. There never was one when the truth became that simple. As I carried the last bag toward the door, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Emily. "I'm sorry. He told me you already knew." I stared at the message for a moment. Then I looked across the street at her closed curtains. Maybe Ryan had lied to her. Maybe he had made her feel chosen in a way that softened her guilt. Maybe part of her really believed the version where I was already leaving. But she had still sat in my kitchen. She had still waved at me every morning. She had still let the street think my marriage was over before I knew my husband was crossing the road at night. I did not answer. I blocked her instead. And when I got into Megan's car with my bags in the back seat, I looked at my house one last time and understood something painful but clean. I was not leaving because they had replaced me. I was leaving because they had tried to make me disappear quietly. The next few weeks were not dramatic in the way people imagine betrayal becomes dramatic. There were no screaming matches on the lawn, no scene in the middle of the street, no final confrontation where everyone finally said the honest thing and walked away changed. What came after was quieter than that, and somehow more exhausting. It was lawyers, bank statements, lease papers, passwords, screenshots, and long phone calls where I had to explain my private humiliation to strangers using calm, organized sentences. Megan stayed with me through most of it. She sat beside me when I called Denise, the lawyer. She helped me make a list of shared accounts, insurance policies, credit cards, subscriptions, and every boring little piece of life that suddenly needed to be separated from Ryan's name. She did not push me to cry, and she did not tell me I was strong every 5 minutes, which I appreciated more than she knew. She just stayed. That was enough. Ryan tried to reach me every day at first. His messages changed depending on the hour. In the morning, he was sorry. By afternoon, he was confused. At night, he missed me and said he had ruined everything. Sometimes he blamed Emily, saying she had made him feel seen when our marriage felt too quiet. Other times, he said Emily had misunderstood what he wanted, as if he had somehow tripped into her house after midnight by accident. I read some of the messages. Then I stopped. Because after a while, all apologies sound the same when they are still trying to make the person who was hurt carry part of the responsibility. Emily sent one letter. Not a text. A real letter, folded inside a cream envelope, left in Megan's mailbox because I had refused to tell anyone my hotel room number. Her handwriting was neat, almost pretty, and that bothered me before I even opened it. She wrote that she was lonely, that Ryan had told her I knew the marriage was ending, that she never meant to humiliate me in front of the neighborhood. That line made me pause. Because humiliation had not been an accident. She had told people we were separating while sitting in my kitchen and drinking coffee from my mugs. She had waved at me every morning while knowing my husband had crossed the street to her house at night. She had helped create a version of my life where I was already gone, because that made room for her before I had even packed a bag. I folded the letter back into the envelope and gave it to Denise. I did not answer. A month later, I went back to the house with Megan and a moving company. Ryan was not there, which was one of the conditions Denise had made very clear. Emily's house was quiet across the street, but her curtains moved when we pulled into the driveway. I saw it. Megan saw it too, and she placed one hand on my shoulder before I could say anything. "You don't owe her a performance," she said. So I gave Emily nothing. No tears on the porch. No shouting. No last look toward her window. I walked into my house, packed what belonged to me, and left behind anything that still felt connected to the version of my life they had tried to erase. The couch where Emily sat too comfortably stayed. The wine glasses stayed. The little ceramic bowl she once complimented stayed on the kitchen counter until the movers asked if I wanted it. I looked at it for a second. Then I said no. Some objects are not worth carrying just because they technically belong to you. The divorce took months, and during that time I learned how strange it feels to grieve someone who is still alive. Ryan became paperwork before he became a memory. His name appeared in emails, legal forms, property discussions, and calendar reminders, but less and less in my actual day. That distance helped. Not because it erased the pain, but because it gave my mind somewhere else to stand. Emily moved out before the divorce was final. Mrs. Keller told Megan, and Megan told me only because she thought I deserved to know that I would not have to pass Emily's porch forever. Apparently, the neighborhood had stopped feeling friendly to her once people understood the timeline. Not everyone knew everything, and I was careful not to turn my life into gossip. But enough truth had reached enough people that Emily could no longer hide behind the story she told first. Ryan and Emily did not last. I heard that later too, though by then the information felt almost irrelevant. Part of me expected to feel satisfied, but I did not. Their ending did not give me back the mornings I waved at her, the nights I slept beside him, or the weeks where strangers on my own street knew a version of my marriage before I did. It only proved what I already knew. A relationship built inside someone else's pain has nowhere peaceful to live. Almost a year after I left, I rented a small townhouse 15 minutes away. It had too much sunlight in the kitchen, uneven floors in the hallway, and a front porch just big enough for one chair and a potted plant I kept alive out of pure stubbornness. It was not the house I thought I would grow old in, but it was mine in a way my old house had stopped being long before I noticed. The first morning there, I stepped outside with coffee and stood on the porch. Across the street, a woman I did not know was getting into her car. She looked up, smiled politely, and waved. For 1 second, my body remembered everything. Emily's robe, her coffee mug, Ryan's phone lighting up behind me, the porch light across the street after midnight. Then the woman got into her car and drove away, and the street became quiet again. I stood there until my heartbeat slowed. That was when I realized healing was not going to arrive as one big moment where everything stopped hurting. It was going to arrive in smaller moments, like standing on a new porch and learning that not every wave hides a betrayal. Not every neighbor is a threat. Not every quiet morning is waiting to break you. Still, I am not the woman I was before. I do not trust silence the same way. I do not explain away patterns just because the truth would be painful. And I no longer confuse being easygoing with being blind. Ryan used to tell me I overthought things when I asked too many questions. Emily used to tell me I was lucky, while looking at my husband like luck was something she planned to take. They both counted on the same thing, that I would keep choosing comfort over awareness. For a while, I did. Then I stopped. And once I stopped, the whole story changed. Because the worst part was not that my husband cheated with someone I saw every day. The worst part was that they thought I would keep smiling from my side of the street while they quietly moved me out of my own life. They were wrong. And that is the part one hold on to now.